Hi everyone. The Asian Real Estate Association of America was founded in 2003. I became a member in 2004, and in 2009, I began serving as a national board member. And later on after that, I even got to serve as a national chair. But one of the biggest highlights of my time with ARIA was the chance and the honor to serve as ARIA's first ever national policy chair back in 2012. Our policy and advocacy efforts throughout the year speaks to the fact that our leaders and our members at ARIA take the time to speak out on behalf of those in the AAPI community that are on the fringes of attaining homeownership. We know that the growth of the AAPI community in the United States is largely driven by immigration. And so from there, we also then know that English is often a second language in the household. Their financial profiles typically don't fit traditional underwriting guidelines. And to that end, it's important that we continue to speak out on their behalf. If you haven't done it already, I hope to see you at more of our advocacy events throughout the year, and certainly our National Policy Day in May, which happens to be Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you to all of our past leaders who directly shaped the policy committee into what it is today. And thank you, Han, for leading it in 2021. I hope to see everybody soon, and take care.
Well, hello, ARIA. This is Tom Trung, your 2019 ARIA National President, as well as your 2014 National Policy Chair. So what does ARIA and policy mean to me? Well, for one thing, policy and the mission to promote sustainable housing for the AAPI community, as well as working alongside with our diversity partners, is what got me involved with this organization, is what gets me passionate about giving back to our communities, and what keeps me truly in love with everyone at ARIA and what we do here. You know, as the national president, but even a few years before that, and then now several years after that, what I've witnessed our organization and what ARIA policy can do for our communities are the following. ARIA policy allowed our communities to get access to languages outside of English. Many of us immigrants come here and our parents don't really speak the language. And so as a young man, when I had to translate a closing document, the mortgage paper for my mom, when I was just a young teenager, I knew how important giving language access to our community is. How about access to credit? Many of us immigrants and foreigners come to this land and we don't have credit, right? What is a FICO score? A lot of us don't, or we're not taught, we're not brought up to have credit. Credit in at least some culture means you owe people, and that to one extent or another is a form of slavery. And so access to credit is really important, in educating our members on building a credit file to get the lowest rates for home ownership is very important. Who can say enough about the No Other campaign, where we were able to finally put AAPI on the map for the quarterly census report, giving us a checkbox instead of putting us other. No longer are we other. We finally have made a mark in that, from that perspective. Diversity and inclusion. Man, diversity and inclusion was not always sexy. Diversity and inclusion recently have been the center of politically charged conversations, disruption in the communities. And for me, our one unified voice, that is what I feel. One unified voice, us coming together, empowering our communities to basically do better, do well, so we can do good. This is Tom Trung. Thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to serve ARIA and stay with us as we make continued change in our communities locally and globally.
Hi guys, Timmer from Atlanta here. Just wanted to send a quick shout out and say hello. It's definitely different times, but the crux of what we do here at ARIA it remains the same. It is to ensure homeownership and real property rights for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And I'm so excited about the journey, how far we have progressed, and just the amazing things that we do at ARIA. And we know that ARIA, what we do here is policy. We change and influence every single lives of everyone around us. And I'm excited that I get to see the journey with everyone. As a national policy chairman, we definitely started raising the bar every single year. And it's amazing to see how many people get engaged and involved. And it's just amazing. So I'm excited about the future of ARIA. I'm excited about the future of what we can do within policy. Thank you to every single one of you who has come on the Hill to DC in the past. And thank you so much for all of our policy past chairs, vice chairs, and the committee members who've done everything and spent so much time and energy to make this amazing organization even stronger together. And with that, have a wonderful day. Miss everyone and talk to everyone soon. Bye.
Hello, my ARIA family and friends. This is your national president from 2020, but also I was your national policy chair for 2016 during the No Other campaign. This campaign taught me so much of the importance of having a voice and what policy meant to me for ARIA. Every time we did our 3-point plan and we presented it to our local and national representatives, it was so important to have that voice to advocate for the AAPI community for sustainable home ownership, but also everything that affects our community. It was so important that I saw what happened during the No Other campaign, where we advocated from a quarterly No Other on the Census Bureau to having Asians represented. That was a big win that I got to see firsthand what we do when we unify to have one voice and we get out to speak to our local and our national leaders. We really can make an impact and change. So to me, ARIA and having policy is so important because as we work together as one voice, we really can make a difference. Again, I hope everyone will show up to policy. In the states and in local government. So keep one voice going. So together with ARIA, we are heard. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, Dick Lee here, your 2019 ARIA National Policy Chair. What does policy mean to me? It means the future of your kids, your grandchildren, all AAPI future homeowners. We as real estate professionals need to do better. We need to advocate for those who need to be advocated for. We need to push for fair housing. I remember the No Other campaign, checking that box, making sure that we are just not other, but we are an Asian American, fighting for fair housing, checking out the boxes for language access reform, getting student loan debt to push for that 1% rule. That's what ARIA policy means to me. It means making a difference for yourself, for your family, for your clients, for the entire AAPI community. So join us at the ARIA National Policy Summit coming up on June 9th. I look forward to seeing you there. Take care.
Hello, my name is Moni Nop. I was the 2020 ARIA National Public Policy Committee Chair. What ARIA policy means to me is the opportunity to be involved and raise the voice for the API community so we too can achieve our American dreams of home ownership. There's still many obstacles today that prevent the API community from purchasing a home and preventing them from their American dreams. Therefore, we as leaders must do everything we can to affect those changes, often done through legislation on a local and national level. At ARIA Policy, we get to help make those changes positively impacting the API community throughout the country. This is what I love about ARIA Policy, and I encourage all of you to support us and get involved too. Thank you.
Hi ARIA family, this is Han Hua from the ARIA Greater Birmingham chapter. I've had the pleasure of being your 10th National Policy Chair this year for 2021. And I am the biggest advocate of using our voice, not only to tell our stories, but also to give representation and to educate and to show people our community, and that we are American, whether we're first generation, newly immigrated, or fifth generation. We're contributing to society, to American society, and we are determined to have our voice heard and have our community needs met.
Good morning, good afternoon, my ARIA family. Welcome to the 10th ARIA National Policy Summit. Starting from our very first policy committee in 2012, finally, the second female policy chair landed here with us, Ms. Han Hua, and our vice chair, Ms. Mei. I truly am honored to serve alongside with these two ladies because they demonstrated we can do it. Today, we need to come in one voice. Federal Housing Administration at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Ms. Lopa Kaluri. Kaluri is the senior leader responsible for the office policy, programs, and operation supporting home buyers, homeowners, multifamily residents, and housing counselors. Kaluri is also responsible for the office oversight of manufactured housing and FHA's single-family, multifamily, and healthcare mortgage insurance program. With over 25 years of experience in affordable housing and community and economic development in both the public and private sectors. Kaluri served from 2011 to 2013 as Deputy Chief of Staff to HUD Secretary Sean Donovan. Prior to rejoining HUD in February 2021, Kaluri was the Chief Development and Operating Officer for the Philadelphia Housing Authority, the nation's fourth largest public housing authority, serving nearly 80,000 public housing residents. Kaluri has board knowledge and experience in executive level management of housing policy, operations, and transactions. So prior to her role at the Philadelphia Housing Authority, Kaluri held leadership roles at multifamily development and management companies Penrose and Community Investment Strategies, Inc. She also served as Assistant State Treasurer for Economic Development for the state of New Jersey and the Director of Housing and Community Resources for the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. Early in her career, Kaluri was a staff member of the Fannie Mae Foundation, where she focused on a broad range of homeownership issues, including anti-predatory lending, the importance of housing counseling, and effective homebuyer education. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome Ms. Lopa Kaluri.
Thank you, Amy. Just wanted to make sure that you could hear me okay.
Yes, we all hear you okay.
Great, thank you, thank you. Amy, thank you so much for that warm welcome and the warm introduction. Secretary Fudge has asked me to express her best regards to you and the ARIA members joining today. Secretary Fudge has made it clear that reducing racial homeownership and wealth gaps that have persisted for decades is a priority for HUD. Facts will be our guide, and we will work to eliminate the harmful legacy policies that have contributed to the gaps. I know that this is a priority that we share with ARIA and its members. I am particularly pleased to be here today as both a leader at HUD and as a member of the AAPI community. As Asian Americans collectively, we all have an obligation to break down stereotypes through our words and our actions. We see what can happen when stereotypes turn to hate speech and then to violence. And we must call it what it is, brutal racism, and condemn it in the loudest and strongest terms. Just as important, we must continue to raise the issues and have substantive discussions about the very real barriers to homeownership faced by the AAPI community. While the AAPI community is the fastest growing segment of the nation, according to the recent National Capacity Report, 1 in 4 AAPIs pay more than half of their income towards housing costs compared to whites, putting many of us, or many Asian Americans, AAPIs, on the edge of financial vulnerability. The report also indicates that AAPIs have a lower homeownership rate than whites. These barriers threaten financial security and can significantly impact a person's ability to pursue educational and employment opportunities and make critical choices regarding their healthcare and save for the future. ARIA's 3-point plan that you will be discussing today has substantive proposals to address these barriers and recognizes the additional cultural and language considerations that are also prohibitive to achieving homeownership. At HUD, we are focused on an agenda of change and opportunity to address these challenges. Our work is based on 3 key priorities laid out by President Biden and Secretary Fudge. The first is accelerating COVID-19 recovery. We are focused on addressing the urgent and immediate needs of a nation trying to recover from an unprecedented pandemic. The second is advancing racial equity. As President Biden and Secretary Fudge have made clear, we must address the systemic barriers to achieving fairness and equity for underserved communities, and particularly communities of color. And the third is climate resiliency. This administration is focused on aggressively combating one of the greatest threats to the well-being of every individual and family, climate change. President Biden's proposed jobs plan has robust and impactful proposals to address these key priorities for both the nation's recovery and the nation's housing needs. The American Jobs Plan would invest nearly $150 billion into HUD programs, providing us with the tools and resources that we need to build and modernize our affordable housing stock, create sustainable places to live, and revitalize our communities nationwide. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget, which was released on May 28th, also provides funding that supports the American Jobs Plan. For HUD, it transforms and empowers us to lay the foundation for a stronger, more equitable housing infrastructure, to help communities thrive and to give every person a fair shot at getting ahead. President's budget request includes a $100 million set aside for a new home buyer assistance initiative that provides funding to states and localities to better support sustainable home ownership. The budget also calls for a home equity accelerator loan pilot program that would test new loan products designed to lower barriers to home ownership for first-time, first-generation home buyers. The Office of Housing, including FHA, is actively involved in many of these initiatives that will support breaking down barriers to homeownership. From an FHA standpoint, we want to see a healthier flow of financing to low-cost housing markets where smaller mortgage loans could help families get on the path to homeownership. One way to do that is to expand the footprint of lending institutions offering FHA-insured mortgages, especially large banks and regional banks that have pulled back in recent years. Another critical component to strengthening HUD's housing is strengthening HUD's housing counseling network and programs to help renters who are ready to become homeowners and to help them prepare for this responsibility. We also believe that HUD should take a comprehensive approach to creating and improving the down payment assistance programs to help those families that need federal support to buy a new home, or buy their first home, that is. It's important that we assist those who do not have access to savings or intergenerational wealth. The barriers to home ownership because of student loan debt is something that we are aggressively working to solve. We absolutely must address FHA student loan debt calculation policies that may be inflating debt to income ratios for borrowers who are otherwise creditworthy. This is an urgent priority for my team and for me, and something that I believe that we can accomplish fairly quickly. The ARIA 3-point plan makes the case for the use of alternative credit models and how alternative credit models can potentially benefit AAPI home buyers. While there are a lot of considerations with alternative credit scoring, it is something that we want to explore further. The work that we are doing to remove barriers to homeownership is crucial, but it does not take away from the commitment and the focus on addressing the immediate needs of homeowners and renters that are struggling financially because of COVID-19. While we are seeing positive signs of an economic recovery, particularly with declines in delinquency and default rates, we are working to use all of our channels to encourage those homeowners who are behind in their mortgage payments but have not sought help to seek COVID-19 forbearance relief right now. We are also focused on making sure that we have the most effective tools available to help homeowners coming out of forbearance to eventually regain sustainable homeownership. With more than 850,000 homeowners with FHA insurance mortgages in serious delinquency as of April, this is without question where we need to focus extensive resources. With so many of you in the audience today engaging directly with home buyers and homeowners, I hope you will amplify this message. If you are struggling to make your mortgage payment, seek help now. I would close with this. National Homeownership Month began last week. It serves as an important platform for us to amplify the successes of homeownership. But this year, under this administration, Homeownership Month means recognizing the challenges that we must solve together. Thank you for having me join you today. I look forward to breaking down the barriers and the stereotypes and paving the way forward with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lopa. And we really appreciate your work to help fair housing and homeownership. Thank you so much. So the next one, please everyone join me and welcome Ms. Han Hua, our 2021 ARIA National Policy Committee Chair. Han, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone from the East Coast, and good morning to everyone on the West Coast and Hawaii. I am Han Hua, your 2021 National ARIA Policy Chair. And I just want to say thank you so much, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Lopa Kalori. You have a very long title. And I'm super excited to introduce our first keynote speaker, titled Amplifying Our Voice, Stefan Kim. Stefan is a passionate storyteller with stellar journalistic instincts, which he has demonstrated in his reporting throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Since joining WABC TV in 2015, Stefan has covered a wide range of important stories. Stefan has consistently reported on poverty within the AAPI community, including an exclusive report in 2016 on Asian American seniors who were riding casino buses to help make ends meet and how the pandemic has impacted Chinatown in NYC. Throughout the pandemic, Stefan has been at the forefront covering the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes, interviewing and telling the stories of countless victims. His reporting helped spark a national conversation on anti-Asian hate and led to the NYPD reversing its posture on how it communicated its investigatory process on anti-Asian hate crimes. Stefan has contributed to multiple primetime specials on the topic, including the ABC News live special, Stop the Hate, the rise in violence against Asian American, the 2020 special, Murder in Atlanta, and most recently, ABC-owned television station news special, Our America, Asian Voices. Before joining WABC TV, Stefan was a reporter for News 12, Westchester Hudson Valley, and New York One News, where he extensively covered local politics and breaking news. Stefan is also a veteran who served as a U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant, and he is currently the co-chair of the Asian American Journalists Association Media Watch Committee. Hi, Stefan. Welcome to ARIA.
Hi, thanks for having me. We could have probably cut that bio down by like 10 minutes and save some time.
No, I mean, we're giving you a chance to tell us, a little bit about yourself, your childhood, your upbringing in Philly as a Korean American, and to our ARIA member that does not know, you're the older brother of one of our own, Gi-Fan Kim, who was the EDGE chair a couple of years ago.
I don't know who that guy is. I have no idea who he is.
Yeah, can you just tell us, what was it like growing up in Philly and, going to being the Army, then going to broadcast journalism at NYU? Not really your typical Asian American path, so to speak.
What was it like growing up in Philly? Okay, let's start with that one. So I'm older than I probably look. I grew up in Philly in the 1980s, and it's not called the city of brotherly love for no reason. I grew up in Northeast Philly, where I was constantly reminded every day that I was different. Basically got my butt kicked every day, fist fights, and there is something about getting knocked down that builds character, I guess, right? I knew from an early age that I was different. I knew from an early age that there was something wrong with that. More than growing up around peers who, endlessly, mercilessly taunted you most of the time for racial reasons. I think what was more traumatic was how this was a sort of systemic bias, as we're exploring today, baked into, I guess, what I would call authority figures, right? I have this vivid recollection of being in fourth grade and the teacher mocking my name and having the entire class collectively mock my name together. She actually led the charge where the entire classroom got to make fun of me because of my name and all my family's names. At the time, I don't think I realized how traumatic that was, but there's a reason for why I hold on to that at the age of 40, right? I think we all have the same stories about taking a lunch to school. You can substitute kimchi with pancit or anything else. And I think we can all relate to sort of that experience, sort of a doubly traumatic experience because, you're humiliated and embarrassed as a child, and then you grow up as an adult and you realize what kind of pain that probably put your mother through to come home and tell her that the one thing that she wanted to share with you, her culture, is being rejected. So, that sort of had a full circle moment for me as an adult. So I knew, fortunately for me, and perhaps I have to thank my rough upbringing, that I wanted to pursue this line of work from a really early age, I'd say before high school. I recognized that looking around me, this was mentioned, representation, there was nobody in the media who looked like I did, right? Reflective of who I am. And so I thought at a very young age that if I could get into journalism, broadcast journalism, that is, that would be a way where if I'm giving you the news and what's important in your day, automatically, sort of subconsciously, I'm trusted as a source of information, as someone who's sort of woven into this fabric of society. It wasn't like Hollywood where you'd have to play a role or have an accent or be limited by that role. This would be a profession where you'd speak in perfect English and you'd be in living rooms. And hopefully my thought was, if one child at home and his or her parents had the newscast on in the background and didn't go to school the next day and look at the next Asian kid as the other and perhaps didn't beat that kid's ass, that would be a win, right? Fast forward to the military. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't enlist because I was overly patriotic. I mean, like I love my country. I was born and raised here, but that wasn't why I did it, to be completely frank with you. College was expensive. I went to NYU. I am Korean American, which means my parents just said, it's a given, go do your service, right? It was the GI Bill at the time. This was under then President Clinton. I could get a substantial amount of financial aid for college. But even in the Army, you face systemic bias, right? You're told in the military that in the Army, no one is black, white, brown, or yellow, we're all green. Well, that's not true, right? Because I've had drill sergeants tell me to go back to China. Think about this. Drill sergeants, a person in a position of authority, telling me to go back to China when I was born and raised in this country and volunteered to die and bleed for my country. Go back to China. In fact, it wasn't even that painful because I'd heard that phrase probably a million times before, right? Wasn't that surprising that it came from a drill sergeant? I bring that up just to sort of point out that in every step of life, growing up in this skin, walking in these shoes, in this country, this is normal. This is not unusual. This is normal. What we're talking about today, I always sort of attempt to correct the narrative. It is not a spike in anti-Asian bias. The anti-Asian bias has always existed. It's an awakening of our people and saying that we're finally tired of taking it on the chin. We finally realize that there is a value to speaking out. You know, we are not accustomed culturally to wear our pain and trauma publicly. I think that this is sort of what I call the Americanization or the evolution of Asian Americans in this country, where we realize, you know, it's an American thing to make some noise. You need to make some noise to earn something, right? Like to kind of take it on the chin and keep your head down and move forward. That's not really an American way. And in some ways, what I'm seeing today is sort of like the evolution of our community in this country. It didn't end with just the military. It didn't end with my 20s. You know, when I was looking for a new job 6 years ago, not too long ago, that's 2015. 2015, we're not talking about a long time ago. Every single news director, every single agent, every single speech coach, with the exception of the one news director who hired me at ABC, they all asked me the same question. It's remarkable. Is English your first language? That is, to me, code, right? Why would you ask that question? Do I have an accent? I was born and raised in this country. Why would you ask that? And it just goes to show the otherism that's attached to being Asian American, right? For some odd reason, there is this perpetual foreignness about us that Americans are having a hard time being comfortable with seeing us as one of us, American. And I believe that that's a two-way street. We need to own it. It's in the history of America, we've never seen where a community gets help when it's not asked for. That's just the way it is, right? Study history. We need to first ask for that help, speak out, which is happening now. We need to first stand up for ourselves, speak out for ourselves, before you can build a broader coalition and have other communities come and grant you the allyship. So I think step one is occurring today. I would even say that step two, I mean, we've seen allies step up throughout the past year or so, but this is just the beginning. So, you know, that is sort of the brief sort of outline of my story in this country, which I would gather to assume is not that different than everyone else on this, you know, virtual town hall.
Yeah, I brought durian to middle school for lunch. I didn't realize how bad, like for me, it was, I grew up in Alabama. So for me, I don't know, I just kind of do my own thing. I beat to my own drum. I brought durian and people thought it would smell bad. And I was like, I'm sorry, it's delicious. Do you want to try? But I totally get it. And I guess, you know, thank you so much for being the storyteller of the community. I know it's hard to change the narrative when there's not much representation and people trying to make it their own narrative. So I wanted to ask, you know, you're one of the few journalists that hasn't westernized your name. Was that a conscious choice? And is there a meaning behind your name?
Well, so let me unpack that from the beginning. It is technically kind of westernized because my dad is unusual. He thought he was cool. My Korean name is Heo Hwan, and he anglicized it to be Stefan, right? So my brother, whom you know, Gi Hwan became Gi Fan. So in some ways, it's anglicized. That being said, of course, Americans have no idea where they came from. Koreans have no idea where they came from. I get that question all the time. But to more specifically answer your question, listen, in television, in my line of work, people change their names all the time. And it's not always for ethnic reasons. There are folks who are white Americans who have quite white American names, but may not roll off the tongue quite easily, right? I mean, you can name a gazillion actors who that's not their original name. That being said, was there pressure to change it? I don't really know, because I don't really care. You know, to be honest, like there was never a moment in my life where I ever said I'm never going to bend and not be me. So there might have been pressure, didn't notice it because I didn't care. I was going to be me. And I've always believed that the onus is not on us to conform to you, right? As Americans, the onus is on our neighbors and friends and colleagues to embrace our differences and get to know our differences, even if that's uncomfortable. So that's not my responsibility to make you comfortable about my name, right? That's on you. So I honestly wouldn't know. I mean, there probably were forces outside of me that wanted me to change it, but never paid attention to that. So
yeah, I love that you beat your own drum. I do too. I think we've been conditioned to make other people more comfortable with us and who we are, when in actuality, I feel like we've contributed as much, if not more, to being an American. So I wanted to ask you, you've covered everything from gubernatorial to presidential election, travel ban protests. You're one of the first there, reporter at the JFK airport when that happened in 2017, and highlighting the wealth disparity within our community. How do you prioritize what to tell and highlight? And have you had to advocate for a certain story to make it to the newsroom?
Well, I mean, to sort of explain the inner workings of a newsroom without putting, all that secret sauce out there are some things that the news cycle itself will dictate the coverage, right? Obviously, if there's a presidential race, if there's a terror attack, you name it, that's going to get covered, right? I'm not going to go and speak to a victim of an Asian hate crime if, Times Square is under attack, right? That being said, let's sort of move past that and imagine it's a day where we have the breadth and time to really sort of pitch stories. Look, I have, and then this may sound like spin, but it's not. I'm fortunate enough to be in a newsroom where they've never questioned what's important to me in my news judgment. In fact, when I was hired, and this goes to the same point I made earlier, I was a little bit on the older side when I came to ABC. Probably a solid 5 to 10 years beyond what most folks would say is a typical sort of landing spot. But so the point is that I was old enough that at that point I knew who I was as a journalist, and everyone else was looking at me and knew who I was. So I was very clear: if you're going to hire me, you're going to get me. You're not going to, don't expect to hire me and expect me to do something different than I've always been doing, right? So the fortunate thing for me was the newsroom that hired me was on board with that. They wanted that. And so they knew that part of what came with me was my deep connections to the community. I'm a member of the community. I don't just say that and do that for professional purposes. That's how I live my personal life. And so luckily for me, whenever I pitch stories about the community, whether it's about, highlighting poverty levels or bias or what you have it, there was never any pushback. There was never any question about why is this important. There was never any question about does this need to be on the air, right? So I would say that that's the first thing. If you ever find yourself in a newsroom like that, like, don't let it go, right? It's rare. I know for a fact, and even in the city of New York, there's a lot of colleagues, AAPI colleagues of mine at other newsrooms that, quite frankly, they're not getting the same support that I am, right? So my newsrooms not only supported that, but embraced that. So, how I pick the stories, it's hard to really describe how I pick stories. I mean, it's what, there's really sort of two criteria for me when it comes to looking at what needs to be elevated, right, or amplified. I got into this line of work for the simple reason of giving voice to the voiceless. So whether it's the Asian American community or any community, if there's a community or a person or a victim who's voiceless, that's my job to advocate for them. So first and foremost, if there is someone who's voiceless and needs a voice, I'm there, right? Otherwise, it just happens that my community happens to be the one that has been so voiceless for so long. So that's not really hard to pick out what's important to me. And obviously, because of the way I live my personal life, those connections are already sort of embedded. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just what speaks to me and what speaks to that mission is what ends up on my radar. And once I pitch it, it's go time.
So then what do you think in crafting any narrative, including our own, are the key ingredients to being a good storyteller to, because I think as we're just getting more comfortable, people, we want to capture that attention, but what are some key, points you would advise us?
I mean, look, the thing is, when you storytell, people connect to people, right? There's a reason why when you watch a typical newscast and a package, that the first thing you hear is the grieving mother. And 10 years from now, you're not going to remember how old that child was or where that child was perhaps shot and killed. You're going to remember the pain in that mother's heart. That's how we connect, right? And so in order to storytell in an effective way, you need to connect with your subjects. And in order to do that, you have to be vulnerable, to be honest, right? There is and I'm not saying this to be critical, it is a matter of fact, but a lot of journalists have a defense mechanism where we it's a survival mode, right? Where we try not to be that vulnerable, because otherwise it really eats you up, and it's hard from a mental health standpoint to sustain that. I'm not one of those people, right? I'm familiar with pain and trauma my entire life. It is in some perhaps sad way normal for me. And it doesn't mean that it's not difficult to absorb the trauma of each victim after victim, after victim, after victim, relentlessly. It does have a toll. But that being said, I think you need to really connect with that pain in order to tell that story. Now, the way I tell the stories, I sort of bring this up as an example. It's a story that I did a few months ago. It's probably not the one that people remember the most. It's definitely not the most sensational one. Yet I bring it up for a specific reason. There was a young Korean American father in Central Park who was assaulted with his family nearby, his young child and his wife. Now, a lot of viewers, had issue with the fact that I didn't describe the perpetrator, right? Now, first of all, that's bait, because there's a lot of racists out there, even among our own community. They're looking to finger point. And to me, if you look at that story, the way I told it, the reason why I didn't name the perpetrator or describe the perpetrator or even show a picture of the perpetrator is because, to me, the story is not about an Asian guy who was beat up. The story to me was about a dad protective over his family, trying to enjoy Central Park. And then the day that America sees us as not the Asian guy who got beat up, but as a dad, as a neighbor, as an American, that's the day we win the war, right? Humanizing the victim is how I tell stories. The story to me is not about the assailant. The assailants, plural, come in all shapes, sizes, colors, backgrounds, poverty, wealth, you name it. I've done it all, right? It's cherry picking to me when you sort of finger point and say, hey, there's a specific profile of an assailant. There's a lot of reasons why you're seeing, quite frankly, what may appear to be a common theme among the perpetrators, right? Because the fact is, the areas that have the most density of surveillance cameras happen to be urban environments that happen to be plagued with complex issues of poverty, mental health, homelessness, communities of color. That doesn't mean that bias is not happening in wealthy, affluent suburbs. They most certainly are. They're just not the ones that are the most, sensational that grab your attention. But that's why I try my best not to focus on the attacker, but to focus on the victim. Because at the end of the day, it's not about finger pointing. It's about lifting up those who need to be lifted up and giving a voice to the voiceless. So that is the way that I tell stories, from the perspective of the victim whose stories need to be told. The more victims, and in this case, Asian American victims, are told in that manner, where America can see us as the doctor or the nurse or the bus driver or just the dad, right? That is how we become ingrained into the fabric of society of America.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm an advocate for having an Asian American, TV network. I need somebody from, the Asian community, the Ted Turner of Asian American TV, because we have the content for it. And amplifying our stories, one of the biggest thing we could do is, be an advocate for you. I got a really good advice about 2 weeks ago when I was in a meeting with AAJA, where they said, if you like the AAPI news reporter on there, email the head director or the producer and say, I really connected with that. And I actually remember the Central Park story you're talking about. As we're concluding, it's really important for us, as we're getting more comfortable in telling our stories, to be, as you say, vulnerable. And what else can we do to help you and other journalists as you move forward so we get more representation on screen?
Well, I mean, so you sort of mentioned like the two obvious ones, right? AAJA is sort of like, I describe it as the ARIA for journalists. It is like a phenomenal support system, but really a family. I've sort of endured the past few months of this coverage because I have so many colleagues in AAJA who have just, done wellness checks. But we do so much more than that, right? We have programming and scholarships and all kinds of employment support. So supporting AAJ is one phenomenal way. It's a family that's been a part of my life for more than 20 years. That's probably the most direct way. The second is one you also mentioned. You believe it or not, when newsrooms, and you can do it
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel like you and I could talk for like another half hour, but we have to get through with the program. So I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, and also congratulations on your new gig as a national correspondent for ABC News. You can find Stefan Kim on Instagram, Twitter, all the social media. Please support him and all of our AAPI journalists. And again, big thank you to Gifan Kim for the hookup. Family connection is everything. And have a wonderful day, Stefan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I really appreciate how you will speak up and be yourself. And also, Han, look at the chat. There are a lot of people, are Durian friends. So you're not alone. So in this particular policy summit, of course, we are serious about talking about our focus on policy advocacy point. But at the same time, feel free to, share your thoughts over the chat. We want to make this really interactive, right? So let's dive into the very first policy point that Aria is focusing on. If it's not because of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, I'm sure we would not be able to own homes in certain areas still. Plus, June is the Homeownership and Pride Month. Collaborating with other diverse groups to support fair housing policy change is so needed and important. ARIA is in support of HR 68 and S 769 to ensure fair housing for all. And you can see HUD has already seen a 30% increase in discrimination complaints. 10% of these complaints actually involve some connection on COVID and identification of Asian American. In the most recent Pew research, it shows that AAPI Hate receives 3,795 reports of racism and discrimination that target Asian American, just between March 19 last year until February 28 this year. Among these cases, 68.1% are shunning, 20.5% deliberate avoidance of Asian American, and 11.1% with physical assault. Last year, I remember my girlfriend got a job offer from a company based in North Carolina. She shared her concern being an Asian American woman living alone in such a predominantly white community. Her fear affected her decision, and she turned down the offer in order to avoid dealing with any sort of discrimination or even hate incidences. No doubt, our recent encounter all over the US, as Stefan described, quietly affected our decision on where to live and grow family. As we mentioned in our Diversity and Fair Housing Summit last month, these hate incidences limited our choice of living and certainly prohibited us from entering into affordable homeownership opportunities as well. Fair housing opportunity is so needed, and I'm so excited to hear directly from Senator Cortes Masto, since she is the sponsor of Senate Bill 769. So let me read you a little bit of her bio. Born and raised in Las Vegas, Catherine Cortes Masto has spent her career fighting for Nevada's working families. She served 2 terms as Attorney General of Nevada, and in November 2016, became the first Latina and the first woman from Nevada ever elected to the United States Senate. During her time as Nevada top prosecutor, Cortes Masto became well known as an advocate for senior, women, and children. She worked closely with local law enforcement to keep Nevada's community safe. She also created a senior protection unit to safeguard older Nevadans from identity theft, exploitation, and abuse. To help middle-class families recover from housing crisis, Cortes Masto created the Mortgage Fraud Strike Force to investigate and prosecute lending scams. She led the fight to hold big banks accountable for their role in the housing collapse and secured a $1.9 billion settlement for Nevada homeowners. Now, as a member of the United States Senate, Cortes Masto has taken a fight for working Nevadians and Washington, D.C. Her position on 6 Senate committees allow her to continue to advocate for Nevadans at the intersection of issues that matter most: the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Committee on Rules and Administration, the Committee on Indian Affairs, and Special Committee on Aging. So, Senator Masto, the floor is yours.
And I want to thank this year's ARIA President, Amy Kong, for her work in organizing this summit, as well as my fellow Nevadan and former ARIA President, Randy Char. Nevada has one of the fastest growing Asian American and Pacific Islander populations in the country right now. And I'm grateful for the work so many of you are doing to help AAPI Nevadans build wealth through owning their own homes. And there's still so much work to do to ensure fair housing for everyone in our communities. Study after study has found that AAPI Americans continue to face discrimination when buying and renting homes. That's just unacceptable to me in 2021. I'm leading legislation to fully fund fair housing efforts and hold lenders accountable for discriminatory practices. I want to make sure everyone has a safe and stable place to call home, and that AAPI Nevadans are welcome and protected in every neighborhood in the Silver State. I'll continue working in the Senate to support Nevada's communities of color, and I'm thrilled to partner with you in that work. Thank you again, and I hope today is a productive conversation.
Thank you, Senator Masto, for all you do and your effort in making sure fair housing for all. Prior to the last administration, the AAPI communities was making great strides in America. In fact, we were even joking about ramen industry has exploded. You're talking about a $1.1 billion revenue business just last year. But look at what happened. President Trump called us China virus and Kung flu, and it lead to hate crimes nonstop. And that lead to increase in housing discrimination complaints. Our people are living in fear. And remember the story about my client we shared. During the Diversity and Fair Housing Summit last year, April, my client will have to do whatever she can to make sure her family is safe. She have moved to a place farther away from work in order to live in peace. Why is it important to think about that? Because it is not an isolated incident just in Chinatown, not just in San Francisco and New York, but actually everywhere. I wanted to show you a couple of interesting slides. The first one will be the tea. If you take a look at this map here, is very interesting. Kung Fu tea. In the same way, they used to talk about where Whole Food was going that managed trafficking. Looking at this, it is all over America. Here's the second one. If you don't believe this is the one, the Ranch 99. The same story is showcasing itself. You see that, these are Asian business indicator on where our people are located. So if you don't think that discriminatory practices are hurting us, I'm sorry, you are wrong. Let me give you some important facts to think about too. First, we've grown our homeownership level to 59%, which rose 6 percentage points from 2000 to 2019. But 2 months ago, the National Coalition of Asian Pacific American Community Development and UCLA released a report showing that 1 in 4 AAPI households are severely housing cost burdened, paying more than half of the income towards housing costs. Think about that. We're not all rich and our needs varies. But what actually is fascinating to me from a policy standpoint, I thought I understood the AAPI community and I have started more than one series. I've learned about the Cambodian, the Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipino and all. What I have learned is that each of our culture have unique ways to embrace homeownership. But none of this could happen without policy in fair housing. So I would conclude here, think about it. Fair housing for all. It is so important in our community.
Good afternoon. My name is John Wong, and I am very honored to be able to present one of the 3 items, policy points for the 2021 ARIA policy plan. The policy point that I am emphasizing is alternative scoring models. There's a specific ask, and that is to support HR 123, which is titled the Alternative Data for Additional Credit FHA Pilot Program Reauthorization Act. This is a bill sponsored by Congressman Al Green, whom we will hear from shortly. And it is really a critical part of AAPIs, in fact, all Americans, having the opportunity to get into first time or maybe even first generational home buyer. And that is because the lenders, the mortgage providers, who are evaluating whether or not to give you a loan, use credit scores as one of the critical components in the evaluation. And what they do is they look at things like credit card payment history, perhaps previous mortgage loans, retail accounts, maybe some car loans in identifying your credit score. The challenge is that nearly 70% of AAPIs over the age of 18 are foreign-born and from cultures that have great debt aversion. In other words, don't borrow, just pay cash. Now, that causes them to have what is called thin files. And with thin files, they are not able to be evaluated appropriately to determine their credit worthiness. They do pay rent. They do pay insurance bills. They'll pay medical bills and utility bills like cell phones, but these are not currently used in the evaluation of their history of repayment. And so HR 123 reauthorizes a beta test, if you will, of using an automated process to collect and to evaluate using such credit tools. Now, there's some history in this, and that's a reauthorization, because back in 2013, Congressman Al Green, the same sponsor of the current bill, put forward the FHA Alternative Credit Pilot Program Reauthorization Act of 2013. This was a step before this one of getting this passed. And I'll go back even further, because this originated back in 2008 with HERA. You may recall the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2018, which was to solve the subprime mortgage crisis. And it's kind of called the Intricate Reform Bill. The reason it's important to ARIA, in fact, that Chair Emeritus Jim Park worked directly with Congressman Al Green's office to, in fact, insert this beta test for alternative credit into that 2008 bill era. So the history of ARIA with this concept is very, very deep. And I urge you to support, ask all of your representatives support the passage of HR 123, which is critical to our community. Now with that, I have the privilege of introducing US Congressman Al Green, whom I've mentioned a few times, who has a videoed message to us. Congressman Green is with the Texas's 9th Congressional District, and he currently serves on the House Financial Services Committee, as well as the Committee of Homeland Security. On the Financial Services Committee, he serves on 3 subcommittees: diversity and inclusion, housing and community development, and insurance, as well as the Oversight Investigations Committee, where a subcommittee which he chairs. He also holds the position of Assistant Whip. Congressman Green received his Juris Doctorate in 1973 from Thurgood Marshall School of Law. He's a member of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, CAPA, which ARIA is very close to, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus. The district that Congressman Green serves in Texas has a strong representation from the AAPI community. Of evidence of how truly blessed Al Green believes he is, whenever he's asked, "How are you?" he often responds, "Better than I deserve." Congressman Al Green, on this last point, you and I differ. You have earned and deserve it all. I give you Congressperson Al Green, who will address us on issues of importance.
Hello, everyone. I'm your Congressman Al Green, and I'm honored to be a part of this event tonight with ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America. I'm also honored to be here with your president, the Honorable Amy Kong. President Kong, thank you for the invitation. I would like to recognize my friend, Attorney Don Lin, the founding president and chair emeritus of Houston Area, an outstanding organization in its own right. Tonight, I'd like to just speak to you for a few minutes about some legislation that I believe you will find very important. The first piece of legislation is the Housing Fairness Act. This is HR 68. The Housing Fairness Act is important now more than before because of the way Asian Americans are being treated when they apply for homes during this time of the pandemic. If you want to get a piece of property for rental purposes, or if you're trying to buy a home, we know that people are discriminating against Asian Americans. Some people have done dastardly things that we need not go into. But this Housing Fairness Act allows us to do what's called testing, where we will send out individuals to see if persons who are leasing or selling are selling to Asians at the same price that they're selling to others, or leasing at the same rate that they're selling to others. This is a great piece of legislation. I think it will be of great benefit to all of America, but especially to the Asian American community. I would think that HR 123, the Additional Credit Scoring Act, would be something of importance to you, because there are many persons that you will market your wares to who won't have a thick credit file. They'll have a thin credit file. We have some 45 million people who fall into this class. And these persons, if given the opportunity to have their light bill, gas bill, water bill, phone bill, utilities scored, they can literally, many of them, acquire a home and pay less for their mortgage payments than they're paying for rental payments. Great piece of legislation. I hope that you'll find benefits when we pass it through the House and the Senate and get the president to sign it. We passed it once before. We'd like to do it again. When we passed it before, there was a pilot program to take place, but we didn't get it funded. We're going to give it another shot and fund the pilot program this time. HR 166, the Fair Lending for All Act, exceedingly important legislation because invidious discrimination does take place in lending. And what is interesting is if the lender should discriminate against the borrower, the lender can escape without criminal penalties for the most part. But if the borrower defrauds the lender, if the borrower defrauds a bank, gives false information to get a loan, that borrower can be punished criminally for a fine not to exceed $1 million and time in jail not more than 30 years. Well, we now have a criminal penalty that we're proposing if the bank should attempt to defraud you when you're trying to borrow money and you give them all of the right information and you're will deter some of this invidious discrimination in lending, the Fair Lending for All Act. The National Flood Insurance Program, something that has been of great importance to all of us, especially to realtors, because if persons can't get flood insurance, they can't buy the property. Literally, there's a nexus between flood insurance and your ability to buy property. Well, we have a piece of legislation sponsored by the Honorable Maxine Waters that will give you certainty in this area. This piece of legislation will extend the program for 5 years. As you know, we've been extending it for some smaller periods of time continuously. Well, it'll have 5 years of life, and we will eliminate the debt. The debt of $20 billion will be eradicated, which will leave a small amount, but not nearly enough to cause the premiums to go up exponentially. And finally, there is a Reforming the Disaster Recovery Act. This act is one that will allow us to streamline the monies that we send to states after we have national natural disasters. These natural disasters can plague us to the extent that years after the hurricane has been gone, after the fire has been extinguished, after the volcano has erupted and we no longer have the ash to deal with, literally, we find ourselves still waiting on the money to get to the end users. Well, the end users can now get the money faster because we streamline the process so that the money gets to the states faster, it gets to them, to the counties and the municipalities faster. It really presents an opportunity for us to help people in a much more of an expeditious fashion. I'm proud of all of these pieces of legislation. Housing fairness is something that we ought to enjoy in this country. Credit ought to be something that's available to all persons who will pay their bills. Some people may not have the traditional credit, but if we have this additional credit scoring, it will help persons who do have light bill, gas bill, water bill, utility bills to pay. And the fair lending for all, no one should be discriminated against when you're borrowing money and you're qualified. You ought to have certainty with flood insurance, and disaster money ought to get to end users much faster. It has really been an honor to talk to you about these issues tonight. I do hope that you'll come to Washington, D.C., and when you do, please come by and visit me. Good things are starting to happen. We haven't done enough, but we are working hard to serve you better. My hope is that this year we will pass an infrastructure bill that will, of course, help all of America, because not only will we have our infrastructure repaired, and this would include the grid, and we have now made housing a part of infrastructure. So literally, there will be money in the infrastructure bill to will get to work. That means that they will spend more money in communities, the dollars turn over, more things are purchased, including homes. This is going to be a good year for us, I believe, in Congress. I think that President Biden is doing a good job, and I want to do what I can to support the efforts to make housing fairness something that is available to everyone and make sure that housing is affordable for all who would like to have a home. God bless you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congressman Al Green, for being such a long-time supporter of the Asian Real Estate Association of America. Thank you for your comprehensive outline of bills that are important to our community, and particularly in housing, and especially for your emphasis and leadership in sponsoring HR 123, the bill that really is key to one of our policy points this year. Now, that's the policy side. To justify the policy, ARIA has always looked for data. And a friend of ARIA's, a company and a sponsor called VantageScore, has been a significant provider of real facts to really provide the backbone for a lot of our policy asks. Basically, VantageScore is that if you have some of these alternative credit, over 40 million additional Americans would qualify to purchase a loan, to purchase a home with a loan that otherwise would. And to speak to us is the Managing Director of Government and Mortgage Industry Relationships, Philip Bracken. As VantageScore's lead liaison to the mortgage industry, Phil represents the company in the marketplace, interacting with mortgage regulators, executives, and analysts to build a consensus on a stronger credit scoring model and solutions for lenders. A senior financial services executive, Phil has more than 40 years of experience in leading large financial institutions and managing complex government and industry relationship programs. Joining VantageScore in April 2018, Phil was most recently Chief Policy Officer and Head of Government and Industry Relations at Radian Guarantee, where he developed policies and managed relationships between government regulators, consumer groups, and trade association. Phil is also the recipient of several Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the Eagle Award, the Lifetime Achievement from the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB, and the Founders Award, Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, NAREB, and the Andrew D. Woodward Distinguished Service Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mortgage Bankers Association. But I'm going to go off script in my introduction because something special to me about Phil for a long time. He was also a star baseball player at the Eastern Illinois University Panthers as a Panther. And in 1971 was drafted by the San Francisco Giants as a catcher. So without further ado, I give you my generation's Buster Posey, Mr. Phil Bracken.
Thank you, John. I call that a foul tip, but thank you very much. And thank you to Amy Kong and the leadership at ARIA for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. I do want to just emphasize our support for the strong support for the 3-point plan at ARIA. The fair housing, language preference, and alternative credit scoring model initiatives are so important. I also wanted to thank Congressman Green for introducing HR 123 again. I'm going to explain a little bit more deeply about the macro why Congressman Green is so vigilant about trying to get this bill passed for all of us. But before I do that, there is some exciting news, wonderful, exciting things happening, positive developments. I'm going to address some of those relative to each of the parts of the 3-point plan. I am going to focus a lot of attention on alternative credit scoring models. But before I do that, I just want to level set for everyone that if you're not a subscriber to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing's demographic studies, you should be so or do so, because that study tells us that over the next 20 years in America, nearly 80% of all new household formation will be people of color or minority. And that presents an opportunity for America, not just us, for America to deliver products and services and policies and programs to meet this drastically changing demographic need. And so that's one of the reasons that all of these initiatives that ARIA has presented in the 3-point plan are so important to all of us. Let me start with fair housing. I want to talk about that for just a moment. You know, while this it is a law, it's been a nice to have in America, but it isn't that anymore. This is a strategic imperative for the United States to provide fair housing to all constituents, especially the underserved marketplace. And I would like to just, while I've got the opportunity, maybe talk about one small piece of the fair housing component that isn't talked about a lot. Before I do that, though, John was correct in mentioning that VantageScore can provide a credit score to nearly 40 million people that can't get a score through the traditional legacy scoring models. And that is, in itself, presents an unfair playing field and maybe needs to be addressed in fair housing. And I want to move just a little bit onto another little part of the fair housing. It's maybe not little, that is important to all of you. And it's essentially the unfair landscape that many of you are experiencing today for aspiring homeowners to be able to acquire a property when faced with competition from institutional investors. It is an unfair playing field. Those people that need 45 or 60 days to get financing approved have a real uphill challenge trying to compete against institutional investors. And when we're in a marketplace where interest rates are at 3% or less, and the property value appreciation is going as well as it is, it's a magnet for institutional investors to want to invest in single family properties and rent them back to the aspiring owner occupant. But we are working on solutions to try to help correct that measure. One of them is a chain of providers alliance that we're working on and have been working on for a couple of years. It requires welding together the capabilities of different companies to provide what I will call is a rather swift and unconditional approval to the consumer aspiring homeowner that needs financing. And it does require really important big companies to provide strong services like that. And I'll mention three. TransUnion is doing a wonderful part in sharing this initiative, as is a company called FinLocker, and certainly both the GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The idea is to be able to get access to consumer permission data in a safe and secure and sound manner so that we can analyze the data, assess the data, and make an assessment of the data about whether a consumer is quickly approved for financing. It's not ready for prime time yet, but we're working on it, and it will be one of those things that does help level the playing field. I want to move on to language preference, because clearly that's an important, it's an essential part of the 3-point plan for ARIA, but it's a strategic imperative for America. Too many times, consumers just aren't given the opportunity to understand difficult and complex transactions because those aren't explained to them in their language preference. I'd like to just say, you know, we could snap our fingers and solve this. We're working on it, and one of the friendly companies that we have a great relationship with provides an extraordinary service that ARIA can tie into right now, and especially the lenders that serve the needs of ARIA and the constituents. It's a company called Talkuments, TALK apostrophe UMENTS, Talkuments. It has built a service that provides a translation capability, not generically, but of specific documents that are the mortgage documents specific to your particular borrower, and converts them into language, Spanish and the 4 most prominent Asian languages, so that consumers can understand the data and the information and be more informed and make better decisions. I'm going to move on here to alternative credit because it is it's a really important part of what I do every day. And again, thank you for highlighting that, illuminating that for all of us. As you know, alternative credit is important. That's why Congressman Green has introduced HR 123, but so is alternative credit scoring models and methodologies. I'll just pause here to mention that in the last 12 months, there were roughly 12.3 billion, that's a B, billion uses of VantageScore in the credit markets for credit card, auto, student loans, personal lines and loans, et cetera, et cetera. Almost 2,200 lenders in America are using VantageScore to deliver those services for consumers. Unfortunately, zero in mortgage. And that's because until recently, there wasn't competition in credit scoring in the conventional mortgage marketplace until Congress passed a bill, Senate Bill 2155, that included the provision that is important to us, Section 310 of that provision, called the credit score competition provision. It required that there would be competition in credit scoring models in the conventional marketplace. And that bill passed about 18 months ago. It also authorized the regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the FHFA, to be able to provide a landscape and a roadmap for how institutions like VantageScore could file for application and approval. We did file our application last July. We anticipate that the approval will be forthcoming sometime here in the near future. And the purpose is to be able to expand the opportunity for those underserved consumers. As we mentioned before, VantageScore can provide a credit score to 40 million consumers that can't get one through traditional scoring models. Nearly 10 million of those customers would have a credit score of 620 and up and would be, if not eligible today, soon eligible for mortgage finance. That is an incredible opportunity for expansion, especially in the underserved markets, and especially in those markets where, as they are with many of the ARIA constituents, those that have thin files, et cetera. That, along with support for Congressman Green's HR 123, is a really important facet of this, of our initiatives, and frankly will be important for all of us as we keep pushing to get that passed. I want to end by just mentioning one more critical issue that I know all of you have on your radar screen, and that is single-family inventory and the shortage of supply in America. While I don't have, and we don't have a tooth fairy dust we can sprinkle on this to solve it, one thing I can tell you is that ARIA and VantageScore and a number of other institutions have formed a group in Washington called the Affordable Homeownership Coalition, specifically working on the changes necessary to increase the opportunity of available single-family inventory across America. We've produced a paper that has 7 ideas to fix that inventory crisis. And if you're interested in seeing it, feel free to contact me, Phil Bracken, at VantageScore.com, or contact your ARIA leadership and they'll ping me and we'll get the paper to them. I want to end this by saying once again, ARIA is a wonderful partner. Thank you for all the service that you provide to the constituents of America. Thank you for supporting the policy initiatives that you are, especially the fair housing, the language preference, and the alternative credit scoring model and methodologies. You are relentless in your pursuit for these initiatives. We thank you for that. And we also want to say thank you again for letting us be your partner. It's onward and upward from here through 2021 and beyond. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil Bracken. And on behalf of John Huang and the rest of ARIA, we want to thank you not just for participating with us today, but also for your longtime support. You've been with us pretty much from the beginning. And so we want to take a moment to recognize that and to say thank you. Thank you for all of your support. I have the honor and privilege of talking about our policy point number 3, language access. Specifically imperative data collection on preferred language fields. In 2017, ARIA supported the inclusion of a preferred language field on the redesigned Form 1003 or Uniform Residential Loan Application in order to better capture data on limited English proficiency borrowers. While it was initially considered for inclusion in the redesigned form, FHFA ultimately determined that the redesigned ERLA was not the appropriate vehicle to collect data on a borrower's preferred language. ARIA continues to work to ensure that data collection and support for LEP borrowers are enhanced throughout the industry. While we were disappointed, the preferred data language field did not make the loan application, FHFA has made strides to continue to partner with us. ARIA collaborated with FHFA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac to create translated resources in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Tagalog for limited English proficiency borrowers. We're also appreciative of the fact that they're considering a supplemental form, but we continue to work to make sure we can measure the need for preferred language. We consider this to be a first step in data collection in order to determine the need and the way forward to serving all communities of limited English proficiency. So with that, I have the distinct honor of introducing Mark Calabria, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, otherwise known as FHFA. Dr. Calabria, nominated by President Trump in 2019, was confirmed by the US Senate and sworn in as director of FHFA in April 2019. Prior to joining FHFA, Dr. Calabria was chief economist for Vice President Mike Pence, handling all economy policy issues with a focus on taxes, trade, manufacturing, financial services, labor, and housing. Immediately prior to his service with Vice President Pence, he spent 8 years as director of financial regulation studies at the Cato Institute, where he helped to establish Cato's Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives. Dr. Calabria also previously served as a senior aide on the United States Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs to both Chairman Phil Gramm and Chairman Richard Shelby. He also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Regulatory Affairs at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He has held a variety of positions at Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies, the National Association of Home Builders, and the National Association of Realtors. He has been a research associate at the U.S. Census Bureau's Center for Economic Studies. He holds a doctorate in economics from George Mason University. During his Senate service, Dr. Calabria drafted significant portions of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008, which created a new regulatory framework for the housing government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the federal home loan banks. He was the primary drafter of the Shelby-Dodd Flood Insurance Reform Bill, which formed the basis for the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. Dr. Calabria, thank you for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm glad to be back for this year's Policy Summit. The mission of the Asian Real Estate Association of America is to promote sustainable homeownership in Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. Supporting sustainable homeownership is also central to the missions of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. FHFA's job is to ensure these regulated entities are in a sound and solvent condition. That enables them to fulfill their missions across the economic cycle. The key word is sustainable. Promoting sustainable homeownership means ensuring that borrowers can stay in their homes even during periods of economic and financial stress. The COVID-19 pandemic has put borrowers and renters alike just through such a stress. I am proud of how FHFA has responded to the pandemic. We have helped keep families safe in their homes. We have suspended all foreclosures and foreclosure-driven evictions. This ensured 200,000 households already facing foreclosure pre-COVID would not have to worry about losing their homes. and it offered security to 28 million single-family borrowers. FHFA allowed borrowers financially impacted by the pandemic to take a time out from their mortgage payments. We instituted a payment deferral plan that let them wait to repay what they had missed until they sold or refinanced their home. This ensured borrowers would not face payment shock. We also helped mortgage markets continue to function. This involved adapting to health concerns and disruptions by temporarily streamlining the home buying and mortgage origination process. As your members know, the shutting of government offices around the country made it difficult for Americans to close on their mortgage transactions. And social distancing challenges reminded all of us of how much the real estate process is still a face-to-face business. FHFA responded to these disruptions by authorizing several flexibilities for enterprise customers. The changes included allowing desktop appraisals on new construction loans, providing alternative methods to demonstrate construction completeness and satisfy borrower documentation requirements, allowing renovation disbursements, and expanding the use of power of attorney and remote online notarizations for the first time ever. We initially authorized these flexibilities for 60 days, and we repeatedly extended them in dialogue with market participants. As local governments and the country reopened, these emergency flexibilities began phasing out. All of them were retired by May 31st. FHFA studied the enterprise's experience with these flexibilities to find lessons learned. And for collateral-related flexibilities, we opened a comprehensive appraisal RFI to solicit feedback. We received more than 1,000 pages of feedback on that RFI. We are close to reviewing all of it before making any permanent decisions. When I spoke to you last year, we were just a few months into the pandemic. At that time, I observed that forbearance rates had just started to decline week over week. Just over 6% of enterprise loans were in forbearance. I welcomed an encouraging trend, but assured you that FHFA would continue to monitor the data closely and would respond appropriately. Fortunately, the downward trend in enterprise forbearances rates continue. The latest MBA survey found just over 2% of Fannie and Freddie loans to be in forbearance. We will continue to respond to changing conditions as appropriate, and we will be thoughtful in transitioning borrowers to remain in forbearance. FHFA's response to COVID-19 helped borrowers and renters stay safe in their homes while mortgage markets continued to function. Our agency also continued to advance our long-term statutory responsibilities and mission. This has included making progress on the language access plan with Fannie and Freddie. This work helps market participants better serve borrowers with limited English proficiency. I want to thank this organization for your support in this effort as a member of the Language Access Working Group. A central component of this effort is FHFA's Mortgage Translation Clearinghouse. This website centralizes a host of translated mortgage documents, educational materials for borrowers, and an extensive glossary of terms related to home buying. The website was launched in 2018 with Spanish language translated documents. In October 2019, we added traditional Chinese language resources. At last year's conference, I announced that COVID servicing scripts were translated into the top 5 languages for borrowers with limited English proficiency: Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Tagalog. By September 2020, we made many more resources available. The website also now includes a tab that directs people to interpretive resources. This ensures that those who come to our website for translated documents have an easy point of reference for further language support. And there are more documents to come as we complete this multi-year plan. Again, I want to thank your organization for your assistance throughout this process. I also want to thank you to work on the supplemental consumer information form. We have appreciated your feedback and are closely reviewing all the feedback we received. We have also appreciated our conversations about credit score models. FHFA is working to foster competition and innovation in a safe and sound manner. Last November, the enterprises validated and approved Classic FICO ahead of the statutory deadline. This protected the housing finance system from sudden disruptions. Now Fannie and Freddie are evaluating and testing applications received in response to the 2020 credit score solicitation. Credit score models are a function of the data submitted to the national credit reporting agencies, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. That said, new credit score models should support more accurate pricing. As new models are developed, FHFA will monitor how they may impact the enterprises and the market, including access to credit. FHFA expects to receive the enterprise's recommendations early next year. We will then ensure that the implementation of any new credit score model does not impose undue burden on market participants. It can take at least 18 months for market participants to prepare for changes in the enterprise's credit score requirements. I look forward to continuing conversation with your organization at FHFA Advances on all of our responsibilities. This includes making sure that Fannie and Freddie never again fail the millions of families whose financial futures depend upon a stable mortgage market. Loss-absorbing capital is the foundation of financial stability and soundness. Fannie and Freddie need enough capital to fulfill their mission of being a source of strength to the housing market in times of stress. We have made progress on that front. Fannie and Freddie combined leverage ratios have declined from roughly 1,000 to 1 starting 2 years ago to 140 to 1 today. The PSPA amendments that FHFA and Treasury announced earlier this year enabled the enterprises to continue building capital. They effectively ended the net worth sweep. That allows Fannie and Freddie to build up to the capital levels required by FHFA regulation, but much more work remains. In their current conditions, Fannie and Freddie will fail in a serious downturn in the housing market. Safety and soundness at the enterprises means safety and soundness for millions of homeowners and renters. This is especially true for low-income and minority families who lose their jobs and savings when downturns hit. These families have strong advocates at this conference and at FHFA. We share a commitment to ensuring that America's housing market functions for all families. I want to close by highlighting one of the biggest challenges many families face: housing affordability. The last year has seen unprecedented house price increases. According to our house price index here at FHFA, prices shot up roughly 12% just in 2020. The effects of the pandemic exacerbated long-term shortages of housing supply relative to demand. These shortages have been especially severe in many areas with robust Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Your organization has noted how these shortages make it harder to access home ownership. Housing is a function of the 3 Ls: land, labor, and loans. The factor that drives up the cost of housing more than any other is the accumulation of burdensome local land use regulations. The National Association of Home Builders has estimated that red tape accounts for nearly a quarter of the price of a new single-family home. And those are just the homes that actually get built. In many cases, steep regulatory costs prevent the construction of new housing in the first place. The accumulated shortfall has left America's housing stock about as old as we have seen it in nearly a century. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks have responsibilities to support affordable housing products. FHFA will continue to ensure that they fulfill these responsibilities, but addressing the root causes of the housing shortage will require continued action by the responsible state and local governments. Thank you again for inviting me to address your policy conference and participate in this important discussion.
Thank you, FHFA and Dr. Calabria, for your partnership and support. And also thank you for the Language Clearinghouse. That is definitely a big step for limited English proficiency borrowers in the right direction. I now have the honor of introducing Dave Waggio, the Acting Director of Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mr. Waggio was announced as the Acting Director of the Cfpb by President Joseph R. Biden Jr. on January 20th, 2021. As the Bureau's Acting Director, Mr. Weiju oversees a $600 million budget and a 1,600 member workforce dedicated to protecting consumers from unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices in the financial marketplace through the enforcement of federal consumer financial law. Currently, the Bureau supervises over 150 depository institutions with assets totaling more than $10 billion. The Bureau also supervises mortgage originators and servicers and payday lenders, as well as companies from the consumer reporting, consumer debt collection, student loan servicing, international money transfer, and automobile financing financial marketplaces. Having been with the Bureau since 2012, Acting Director Waggio is committed to ensuring a smooth transition to President Biden's nominated director, Commissioner Rohit Chopra. Acting Director Waggio will focus on taking all available measures to protect consumers, particularly vulnerable ones, negatively affected by the pandemic. He will also work to utilize the tools of the Bureau to tackle racial disparities and inequalities laid bare by the pandemic. Prior to becoming Acting Director, Mr. Waggio served as the Bureau served the Bureau as acting chief of staff, as lead for talent acquisition, and most recently as Bureau's chief strategy officer. As chief strategy officer, acting director Waggio led the development of an integrative approach to strategic planning, policy prioritization, enterprise risk management, organizational performance, and program evaluation. Acting Director Weiju utilized this integrative approach to improve the strategic advice provided to the director and to better translate the director's priorities into tangible, reportable, and auditable programs and initiatives. In addition to his experience at the Bureau, Acting Director Waggio has served in human resources capacities at the National Institutes of Health, the Office of Personnel Management, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Acting Director Waggio began his career in government service in 2006 when he joined the NIH as a Presidential Management Fellow. Acting Director Waggio is devoted to public service both as a profession and a calling. He co-chairs the Federal Innovation Council, which is a leading federal government interagency body to drive public sector innovation. He also co-founded the largest event to connect, develop, and inspire emerging public service leaders, the Next Generation of Government Summit. Acting Director Waggio received a master's degree in public policy from the University of Minnesota and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Please join me in welcoming Acting Director Dave Waggio.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to provide my thoughts on ARIA's three-point policy plan alongside such other distinguished leaders. I know this event is traditionally held in person on the Hill, and hopefully we are finally nearing the conclusion of endless Zoom meetings and wondering if we're still on mute. Though some aspects of life may be returning to normal post-COVID, the CFPB is continuing to sound the alarm on the upcoming crisis in housing security. The CDC eviction moratorium will expire on June 30th, and millions of renters and homeowners who have been disparately impacted financially by the pandemic will likely soon be evicted or foreclosed upon. As I mentioned in my remarks at April's ARIA Housing and Diversity Conference, about 9 million tenant households are behind on their rental payments, while about 900,000 tenant households are evicted in a typical year. We are facing an eviction crisis roughly tenfold the scale of the pre-pandemic normal. I have continued to prioritize the CFPB's resources towards seeking relief for consumers affected by this pandemic and focusing the agency's view on addressing long-standing racial inequities in the financial marketplace. I completely agree with ARIA's fair housing policy point. And in my time as acting director, I have elevated and expanded existing investigations and examinations and added new ones to ensure that fair lending enforcement is a top priority and emphasized accordingly. We will continue to root out discrimination in lending and other unlawful conduct that disproportionately impacts communities of color and other vulnerable populations. I am especially concerned that the rise in anti-AAPI hate crimes and racism is going to have a profound effect on the opportunities for AAPI households in the coming years. We must not allow this recent activity to become normalized or commonplace. We continue to have a reckoning on racial relations in America, and voices in the AAPI community need to be loud and strong to draw attention to all aspects of discrimination and racism when it occurs. The focus of my remarks today will be on the CFPB's effort to reach consumers with limited English proficiency, or LEP. The CFPB is committed to its fair lending mission of ensuring fair, equitable, and non-discriminatory access to credit for individuals and communities, including the provision of financial products and services to Many of these challenges stem from language access issues. Financial disclosures and written documents are generally not available in languages other than English, and some financial institutions do not have bilingual employees or access to interpretation services. I regard addressing these challenges as a core part of the CFPB's work to advance racial and economic equity. Recognizing the compliance risks and uncertainty that many financial institutions raise as challenges to better serving LEP consumers in non-English languages, in July 2020, the CFPB issued a request for information, an RFI, seeking public comment and information that would enable us to better understand the challenges specific to serving LEP consumers and to find ways to encourage creditors to increase access for LEP consumers. Thereafter, in January 2021, the CFPB issued a statement to outline compliance principles and guidelines that encourage financial institutions to expand access to products and services for LEP consumers. The goals of the January LEP guidance are to promote access to financial products for all consumers, to facilitate compliance by providing clear rules of the road, and to educate and empower consumers to make better informed financial decisions. Financial institutions play an important role in building a more inclusive financial system and presenting opportunities for LEP consumers to build their financial capabilities. The effective and responsible integration of LEP consumers into the financial marketplace has the potential to create positive benefits for consumers and the financial services industry alike. We encourage everyone at this event to read our January LEP guidance. I also want to note that the CFPB has developed a suite of educational materials to assist LEP consumers throughout the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, including a hub of web-based COVID-19 content for consumers and other stakeholders, with resources available in several languages. These resources include a mortgage and housing assistance page with resources for homeowners and renters, which can be found at consumerfinance.gov/housing. The page contains materials addressing common language information in a variety of ways to facilitate communication with LEP consumers in non-English languages. Because the IRLA form is under the purview of the FHFA, I respectfully defer to them on comments regarding the proposed preferred language data field addition or any other changes to the IRLA form. The CFPB encourages financial institutions to better serve LEP consumers while ensuring compliance with relevant federal, state, and other legal requirements. I also want to briefly address ARIA's other policy point related to credit scoring reform. The CFPB recognizes the issue of building credit history can be a culturally difficult one for many who believe in debt aversion. Consumer reports and credit scores act as passports, providing insight to lenders about a consumer's ability to manage credit extended to them. Without that insight for lenders, access to credit can become more expensive, if not impossible, to secure. The CFPB estimates that 26 million Americans are credit invisible, meaning they have no credit history at all. Under the most widely used scoring models, another 19 million people have credit histories that are too limited or have been inactive for too long to generate a credit score. With our partner financial regulatory agencies, we issued a joint statement in December 2019, recognizing that alternative data not typically found in consumer credit reports, when aligned with consumer protection laws, may expand access to credit for some consumers. This may enable consumers to obtain additional products and more favorable pricing and terms, especially for those consumers who currently may not be able to consumer reports. We recently published a report examining significant changes in the prevalence of actual payment information in furnished credit card accounts. Financial institutions' decisions regarding which information in a consumer's credit account to furnish to consumer reporting agencies have important implications for which factors lenders use to evaluate potential and existing borrowers. The CFPB will continue to monitor emerging trends in the alternative credit space and provide findings when necessary. I want to conclude with acknowledging that this may be one of the last times I am providing remarks as acting director of the CFPB, though the timing is ultimately left up to the Senate. It has been such an honor to lead the agency that I've called home for the last 9 years. I came to the federal government because I believed the public sector can be an overwhelming force for good. I was incredibly fortunate to come to a startup government agency like the CFPB, which has had a measurable impact in improving the lives of everyday Americans. But there is still so much work to do, and so many consumers facing financial inequity and hardship that need our help. My hope is that at least some of you watching today will be inspired and encouraged to serve in the government. To loosely borrow from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people serves best when it is represented by all the people. The best way to effect real policy change is to be part of that policymaking process. I can't think of a better way to do that than to serve. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Acting Director Dave Waggio, for participating in ARIA National 2021 Policy Summit. Hi, my name is Kurt Nishimura, ARIA National President-elect for 2023 and founder of ARIA Greater Phoenix Chapter. It is my pleasure to introduce and give you the biography for Erica Muratsugu. Erica Muratsugu was appointed by President Joe Biden in April 2021 to serve as Deputy Assistant to the President and AA and NHPI Senior Liaison. With a distinguished career in the federal government and nonprofit advocacy, she has spent her professional and personal life fighting for the social justice and the empowerment of communities and individuals. At the White House, Erica supports the administration on a wide variety of president priorities, engages with the AA and NHPI communities and leaders on important issues such as advancing safety, justice, inclusion, and opportunity for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities through a whole of government approach to racial justice. Her past government service includes serving as the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations at the Department of Housing and Urban Development under the leadership of Secretary Julian Castro in the Obama administration, and was the first ever Senate Deputy Legislative Director at the Senator Daniel K. Akata of Hawaii and Senate Democratic Policy Committee under Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada. In the nonprofit sector, Erica led 2 teams to the National Partnership for Women and Families for Economic Justice and Congressional Relations, advancing workforce and health policies focused through a gender equity and race equity lens. Erica has also led government relations, advocacy, and community engagement teams at the Anti-Defamation League and leading anti-hate organization. It is my pleasure to introduce Erica Muratsugu. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you very much. Aloha, y'all. I appreciate you allowing me to share this space with you during your annual policy summit, which I, like Dave, usually attend with you here on the Hill every year, but not this year, maybe next year. I also want to thank ARIA and your members for all of the work that you do to promote sustainable homeownership opportunities in Asian American communities by creating this powerful national voice for housing and real estate professionals that serve this dynamic market. So today I'm zooming in from the White House, which sits on the ancestral homelands of the Nacotchtank. As Kurt mentioned, I have a new role in the White House. It's a new role for me, but also a new position in the White House as AA and NHPI senior liaison. And I'm coming into this position at a time of persistent anti-Asian hate and violence. And during a pandemic that's taken a severe economic and personal toll on the Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, just as it's impacted so many communities of color. I will work here to address the needs of the AA and NHPI communities, working closely with the White House Office of Public Engagement that includes the national AA and NHPI organizations, and also the newly reconstituted White House Initiative on AA and NHPIs, which links our community leaders and the grassroots around the nation to the resources of the federal agencies. Now, Kurt also mentioned that I've spent my entire life as a professional and, as some of you know, as a volunteer fighting for social justice and the empowerment of communities. And I'll continue to do that from the White House because I have the confidence of a president who sees us and hears us, and a president and a vice president who are committed to providing us with the safety and opportunity that we should expect and can hope for. This was demonstrated on the president's first day in office when he signed an executive order advancing racial equity through the federal government. In that executive order, he acknowledged that it has not been a level playing field for communities of color, that there are entrenched disparities in our laws, public policies, and public and private institutions that have often denied that equal opportunity to individuals and communities. So with this day one racial equity executive order, the president has committed to bringing an ambitious whole of government equity agenda to solve those systemic inequities. In his first week in office, in response to the spike in anti-Asian hate and violence, the president also acted quickly and resolutely by issuing a presidential memorandum condemning racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against AA and NHPI communities. A month later, he issued a fact sheet that showed further actions he's taken to combat hate and address health disparities and other disparities for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, including actions by the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, and others. And in May, just last month, is it last month? Yeah. The president signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed by an overwhelming margin in the House and the Senate. And this critical new law will bring our nation one step closer to achieving justice and equality for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities and all communities. Now, the president also took another important action in May by signing an executive order advancing equity, justice, and opportunity for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. That executive order reestablished the White House Initiative on AA and NHPIs and delivers on the president's commitment to reinstate and reinvigorate this historic initiative. The initiative is charged with driving an ambitious whole of government agenda to advance the equity, justice, and opportunity for AA and NHPI communities by focusing on anti-Asian hate and violence, the COVID-19 response, data disaggregation, and language access issues, among many other important priorities that have been perpetual in our communities. That same day, President Biden also announced that Crystal Kai has been selected to serve as the executive director of the initiative. Many of you know that she has a long-time background in Congress and a deep relationship with the AA and NHPI communities. And she'll bring to bear those experiences as the executive director. Now, as someone who actually worked closely with ARIA when I was with Senator Duckworth's office, I know firsthand how critical you are to the communities that you serve. As a former assistant secretary at HUD during the Obama administration, I understand the housing issues that the country faces. And President Biden also understands and believes that affordable, safe, energy efficient, and resilient housing is the foundation upon which working families build their lives, invest in their children's future, and participate in their communities. The president also knows that stable housing will remain out of reach for tens of millions of Americans, even after the COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis comes to an end. These challenges are even more severe in low-income communities and communities of color, which have been segregated, excluded, and neglected for generations. So it should come as no surprise that investing in housing is an essential part of President Biden's strategy to grow strong, healthy communities in every zip code. Through his American Jobs Plan, President Biden is proposing a bold $213 billion investment in America's housing infrastructure through a number of federal programs and proposals with bipartisan support. This investment is paired with expansions of bipartisan tax credits as well as incentives for land use reform that will allow greater levels of affordability in more and higher opportunity places across the country. Together, our estimates suggest that this will enable the construction and modernization of more than 2 million sustainable places to live. And along the way, these investments will create and sustain hundreds of thousands of good-paying union jobs and provide employment and economic opportunity for residents in assisted housing. So finally, I wanted to close by making sure that you knew that the White House has been engaged in conversations with all segments of the AN and HPAC communities, moving towards more equity in the federal government, whether it's with respect to housing, education, or health, or anything else that are the issues of the day and top priorities for the nation and our communities. We're committed to working hand in hand with our communities to find solutions to the problems and challenges that are facing us today, and also looking forward to having a shared space and joy and celebration when we have victories. We look forward to working with AREA as well as we work towards those solutions. So, mahalo nui loa for the opportunity to join you today, and with that, I will turn it back to Kurt.
Hey guys, and hey Erica, thank you so much for joining us today, and Kurt, thank you so much for all the stuff that you do. And it is great. Han put a little chat comment. It is great to see amazing women sitting in the White House. It's powerful. It sends a message, and kudos to everyone who is serving today. Next, we have one of my really good friends from the great state of Georgia. Who would have ever thought that Georgia would have so much representation? But it's a pleasure to introduce one of my friends, Bee Nguyen, Secretary of State. She's running for Secretary of State. She is our state representative, and she an amazing, amazing person. You're going to get the story, and I'm excited to introduce her. She's one of 5 daughters born to a resourceful mother and a working father. And he made minimum wage, $3.35 an hour in 1981. And at night, he studied in their basement apartment and used a cardboard box as his desk. But he truly believed education was the only way to escape poverty. She grew up in Augusta, Georgia, which is not too far away. She graduated from a Georgia public high school, and she moved to Atlanta, attended our prestigious Georgia State University, and started a nonprofit to educate and empower young women, which is where I met her. She spent over a decade in Georgia public schools, where she's learned to organize her community and demand change for students. And she did truly make history in Georgia by being elected to the Georgia House District 89, the seat formerly held by the amazing Stacey Abrams. At the Georgia State Capitol, she has been a leading advocate for public education, criminal justice reform, and voting rights. And during her tenure, Bee has successfully overturned the exact match voter registration laws that restored the right to vote for the 53,000 Georgians impacted by this policy. She's an entrepreneur, she's a community organizer, she believes in the power of everyday Georgians. I believe it. 2020 and 2018, she opened up her personal home and joined hands with their neighbors and volunteers to mobilize tens of thousands of Georgia voters to cast their ballots for the Democratic candidates. This is how we won, you guys. So Bee knows firsthand the importance of a free and fair democracy, and that's why she's running to be our next Georgia Secretary of State. So kudos to Bee. And to that, Bee, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for having me on here today. My name is Bee Nguyen, and Tim shared a little bit about me, and I will share with y'all just, how my parents got here and some of their life experiences that led me up to making that decision to run for office. I think that probably many of us on this call, children of immigrants or immigrants ourselves, we are often faced with this decision to really honor our family legacy and our stories. And part of the reason why I am here today is just I was just searching for a pathway to figure out how I could best honor my parents' legacy. I'm the daughter of Vietnamese refugees. My parents came to the United States in the late 70s. Before they got here, my dad was held a prisoner of war in what they called re-education camp for 3 years in Vietnam. And when he was released, my parents were part of the many millions of Vietnamese people who fled via boat. Like other folks who left the country and, put their hopes on trying to find an escape route, navigating the Indochina Sea, they had no idea what that was going to look like, if they were going to make it, but they ultimately knew that they wanted to provide a better life for themselves and for our family. And so my parents were very lucky. They were able to make it to Thailand, where they were in refugee camp, because a fisherman saved them. He found them in the middle of the ocean, stranded, and he took them on board his fishing vessel and helped them get to refugee camp. And when my parents recall that story, they said they weren't even able to communicate with him because the lack of shared language, and they don't know his name. What they did know is somebody took that risk to save their lives and bring them to shore. And so when my parents made it to the United States, it was under the presidency of Jimmy Carter, and he had just made that decision to increase the number of refugees that that the country was taking in from 5,000 to 10,000 a month. And it was a very politically unpopular decision that he made. And I think that we have seen this through the history of our country, that when it comes to immigration, when it comes to migration, the majority of Americans have always opposed this increase in immigration because of fear of the unknown. And that was certainly true in the 70s. And so when President Carter made that decision, it was actually a Republican governor in Iowa who said, I'm going to resettle as many Vietnamese refugees into my state as I can. His name was Robert Ray, and my entire family was resettled in Iowa, where I was born in 1981 in Ames, Iowa, as my dad was going back to school to re-earn a degree that didn't transfer when he fled to the United States. And like Tim said, his very first job in America was working as an orderly in a mental institution, making minimum wage in 1981. And quite frankly, our minimum wage has not increased based on what it should since then. But one thing my dad felt was very, very important was education as being the key to escaping poverty. And that was indeed true for my family. I was a welfare baby as well as my older sister. But by the time we got to Georgia, my dad was working 2 jobs. There were 5 girls. And we went to a really good public high school in Augusta, and they were building the opportunity for us to be able to pursue whatever it was that we wanted to do. I think, though, what was absent in our household was, one, this duty, this civic duty, and this idea of community building and power building and political building. I think a lot of folks will be able to tell you stories about going to the polls with their parents, or the first person they voted for, or a candidate that inspired them. But I don't have any stories like that. My parents never talked to me about the importance of civic engagement. In fact, they, because of what they experienced in their own home country, really wanted me to keep my head down and stay quiet, stay out of trouble, and focus on these really traditional career paths. They wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a pharmacist or an engineer. And I did not really envision that for myself, because in the absence of that imagination to build political power, to think about what it would be like to be represented by somebody who understands language barriers, cultural nuances, or somebody who even looked like me. I think a lot of times when we are watching other people do things, sometimes we have to envision somebody who looks like us to believe that there are those same opportunities for us. For me, that didn't exist. And because I watched my parents struggle in these ways that they previously didn't have to face, examples being going to the grocery store and having to be my parents' translator, having people dismiss them because they have heavy accents, even though they speak English. as children, we were the ones responsible for making those phone calls to utility companies to argue about a bill or to step up when somebody was ignoring our parents at the grocery store. All those types of things stayed with me, and I really wanted to find a way to build power for other people. So I ended up starting a nonprofit in 2009, working in public schools in Atlanta and DeKalb, and I spent 10 years in the classroom. And that was really my foundation for understanding why it's so critically important to not only build power as a community, but to engage on policy issues and to be part of the political process. The students that I work with, they all went to schools that were underfunded by our Georgia state budget. They also they experienced, attending under-resourced schools, but alongside that was poverty, not having livable wages, parents working multiple jobs, them having to work an additional working jobs to help pay basic things like keeping the lights on and taking care of their younger siblings, along with lack of access to transportation, to healthy foods, to secure housing, all of these things that are fundamental in helping young people be able to focus on school, be successful, and have a pathway towards a career. And what was different from what really set these students apart, was different from my experience, was that many of them were undocumented. Their families fled from countries that did not assign them refugee status. They fled because of the same reasons that my parents fled, because they wanted to build a better life for their children. And they fled from conflict and poverty and violence. And they had treacherous journeys, just like my parents had, only they were walking across the desert, wading across the Rio Grande. And at the time, when I first started working in these schools, we hadn't passed deferred action for childhood arrivals yet. So these kids who were brought over when they were 3 or 4 or 5, whose primary language was English, who grew up American, had no ability to get a driver's license, to go to college, to get a work permit. And when they were in these situations, trying to study and figure out what they would do next, and they just had no opportunities in front of them. When Obama did pass deferred action for childhood arrival, my students can tell you exactly where they were. It was a historic moment for their families. And I thought my students would tell me the thing they were most excited about was being able to finally get a work permit so they could get a job, or finally be able to go to college. But the thing they were most excited about was being able to get a driver's license, not because they wanted to drive themselves, but because they wanted to drive their mom or dad or uncle or aunt to their places of employment, because they lived in daily fear of their parents driving to work, getting pulled over for a broken taillight, and then being sent down a deportation pipeline. It was through those many years of working in public schools that I began to understand that the work I was doing could only meet sometimes the needs of the 75 students I was working with a year. But in reality, the state of Georgia has tens of thousands of students in those same positions. And in order for us to make that change, we have to think about how those policy decisions trickle down to everyday people. That is really the impetus for how I got involved in policy. It was also the impetus for my decision to run for office. And it has also served as a moral grounding for me as I've been a state lawmaker. And as I knew when I was taking this career path, it is very true that the people that we elect, it is really important to elect people who understand how policies affect everyday people, who have diverse life experiences, who understand what it is like to live in poverty, and who understand the challenges that many Georgians and many Americans face in our country. When I did decide to run in 2017, I was told it wasn't my turn. I was just a social justice advocate. I was a nonprofit person. I didn't fit the mold of what people envision an elected official should be. And when I was elected, I made history as being the first Vietnamese American elected in the state of Georgia. And I was the first Democratic Asian woman elected in our entire history in our state. And up until last year, I was the only Asian woman serving out of 236 lawmakers, which is a very isolating position to be in. And right away, I recognized the importance of that representation, because I understood how our decisions as it pertains to language access is not just about providing equity. It is also about public health. It is about economy, and it is about recognizing that we just need to meet people where they are, and that the diversity in our state is our strength. Over the years that I've served in Georgia, we have seen a number of anti-immigrant bills introduced every single year, and I have been at the forefront of battling against those bills. Some of those bills are just innately cruel and don't make sense. An example of something that we had seen every single year was an effort to take away the Department of Driver Services decision to translate our driver's test into other languages. That makes sense to have a written portion in a different language, because when I think about people like my parents who came over here and they were close to the age of 30, had spoken Vietnamese as their primary language, and would learn how to drive a car a lot faster than they could learn to read and write in English. And not having necessities like that, it slows down people's ability to be fully integrated into the community, to get a job, to go to school. And it also increases the isolation that so many people feel when they first move to this country. So a bill like that didn't make sense from an economic standpoint, a public safety standpoint, and it was just innately cruel in nature. But the issue is when we have elected officials who don't understand the issues, who are not personally impacted by it, they are willing to introduce things like that because, it reinforces rhetoric that we've seen and heard about immigrants and who we are in this country. Part of what I've also worked a lot on is advocating for full funding for public schools because of my experience there. We've been in a place in Georgia where we've seen our public funding education cut every single year. In fact, just 2 years ago, they cut it by $1 billion. And then working on criminal justice reform, when I look at our criminal system, it is often, you cannot separate our immigration system and our criminal system. And we know that people of color are caught up in the criminal system in a different way. And part of being an ally and building those broad-based coalitions is making sure we show up as well for issues that impact other communities of color, even if we don't feel it acutely impacts us in the same way. And lastly, voting rights. So voting rights in Georgia, every single year we see people introduce bills to make it harder to vote. And unfortunately, last year, this happened much more aggressively. I was in the middle of all of this chaos related to elections laws and the attempts to overturn the election results in Georgia. And certainly AAPI voters were a very significant part of being able to deliver a win for Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. We actually turned out in higher numbers than we have ever turned out before. And part of that is because of the infrastructure that people have built on the ground and making sure that we are doing things like offering in language canvassing, in language phone banking, and critical materials that people can understand, and also giving Georgians a reason to go to the poll. We know that in the last year and a half, we've seen an increase in violence and hate crimes against our AAPI community. We know that there was rhetoric surrounding the public pandemic and assigning blame on one country, which ultimately translated into making all of us a target. And for the first time, we saw this mobilization of AAPI voters who were part of a broad-based coalition. It was our moment to say our votes matter. We're going to show up because we want something different for our state and our country. And we are certainly an important part of the electorate, one that has often been overlooked. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to AAPI voters who said, this is the first time anyone's ever asked me to vote. This is the first time anyone has ever reached out to me, or the times in which AAPI voters have issues with language access. One statistic that I think is critically important is in 2020, 70% of AAPI voters in Georgia voted by either mail or early voting. And since the passage of Senate Bill 202 that Georgia Republicans passed this year, it will make it harder for AAPI voters to vote. There are restrictions on mail-in ballots and a shortened time frame for mail-in ballots. And we know that part of the reason why our voters have used mail-in ballots at a higher rate than any other group is language comfort. And I want to share with you one story, and then I will really briefly talk about the Secretary of State's position and why it's important. In 2016, I worked on my first political campaign for Representative Sam Park in Gwinnett. And Tim knows Sam. And the backstory to that is Helen Kim Ho invited me over to her house for dinner, and Sam was there. And I thought that she was trying to do like a dating setup, but it was actually a political setup. And Tim's laughing because Sam's our first openly gay man to be elected in Georgia. And I thought, oh, a young progressive man running for office in Georgia. I got to support this guy. I'm going to do whatever I can to help him win. He was running against a 3-term incumbent. She had outraced him by a 3-to-1 margin. We built a grassroots campaign, and we used multiple languages, including Vietnamese, Spanish, Korean, Hindi. And we had all of our moms phone banking for us, even though they were very reluctant. Sam's mom, who is no longer with us, is Korean, and she voted for the very first time in 2016 for her own son. And my mom voted for the very first time in 2016 because her 5 daughters begged her to do that. But I remember knocking on the door of a Vietnamese voter who had lived in Gwinnett County where Tim lives, and he's lived there for over 40 years. And he said, I want to vote, but I'm scared. I'm intimidated by going to the polls. And he did not know the difference between Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And I speak Vietnamese well enough to have a conversation and explain to him that I'm here to help, but I can't really translate policy. I have like the vocabulary of a 12-year-old because I spoke it with my parents in my household growing up. And so we had a translator call him and translate for him. And he said, you know what, I want to go vote. And the translator said, okay, well, I can take you to the polls with me and I can go with you to alleviate any anxiety around being a first-time voter. And part of why voting rights are so important is because it preserves rights like that. The right to have assistance at the poll, the right to have a translator at the poll. And so the translator is blind in one eye, is unable to drive, and my little sister went and picked him up, drove him to the house of the voter, babysat the voter's children while the translator and the voter went to the polls, and the man casted his vote for the very first time in 2016. It was an 80-mile round trip to help one voter cast his ballot. But that is the type of story that will stay with me forever, because we know when we give people opportunities, we meet them where they are, and we help people remember that the power they have, they are going to show up. And I bet you after that experience, you create a voter who is going to go out and vote again. And that is how we build community and how we build power. And so I'm running for Secretary of State in Georgia. If elected, I would be the first political statewide AAPI elected, period. And part of being Secretary of State is overseeing elections. And part of being Secretary of State, along with the Elections Division, is corporations, charities, funerals and securities. What am I missing? And licensure. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State's licensing board does not oversee realtors' license, but a lot of other industries. So the important thing is using the lens of equity, access, and efficiency across all the divisions of the Secretary of State. That means making the lives of Georgians, because the Secretary of State's office touches millions of Georgians, making the lives of the people who live in our state easier in whatever ways that we can. That also means meeting people where they are. So an example of how important this office is what if the Secretary of State's office invested in language translation for these divisions? We know that immigrant business owners are a critical part of Georgia's economy. If you are a business owner, you have to use the Secretary of State's office for the corporations division. But everything is only in English, and it would not be a huge investment to simply translate that information to additional languages. And that could be applied to other divisions. For example, when you go online and you request your absentee ballot only in English, translating that to other languages would improve access and efficiency. There's also a really critical consumer protection aspect that the Secretary of State can help with, including some regulations that would center around public health, but also the consumer protection divisions around things like shell companies that maybe send out a lot of robocalls to folks to try to buy their houses undervalued, things like that. And I think there's tremendous opportunity to make improvements within the Secretary of State's division. And what I actually like about the Secretary of State's office is all of these ideas and policies that can be brought forth are actually not partisan, with the exception of elections. Unfortunately, that is very partisan at this time. But, and one more thing I'll talk about related to elections is we saw the weakening of that position of the Secretary of State with the passage of Senate Bill 202. What can the Secretary of State's office still do, even though there is a weakening of that position as it pertains to elections? A lot of things. So one, work collaboratively with all 159 counties. We have 159 counties with each of their own local election boards. I've sat on the elections committee in the Georgia House for 3 out of the 4 last years, and every single year, election directors are hesitant to testify because they do not want the Secretary of State to be punitive in nature. If the Secretary of State was collaborative, provided training and resources, we could run more efficient elections in all 159 counties. Instead, what we've seen is a history of deflecting and blaming local elections officials. I believe leadership should be collaborative. We come to the table and we work together to find solutions for those challenges we face. 2, I'm just going to bring this up briefly because it's critically important right now. The state of Georgia Secretary of State's office has used the cleaning up voter rolls. They have used it in a way to remove Georgia voters erroneously and at a very aggressive rate. If you are a voter in the state of Georgia and you are considered inactive, for example, you skipped a couple of elections, you can be removed from the rolls. And all you get is a notification in the mail and you have 40 days to respond. I don't know how many times I get a piece of mail that looks like junk mail and I don't pay attention to it. Increasing that communication between voters so that they know they are in danger of being removed from the voter rolls is critically important. In fact, Georgia is set right now to start removal of hundreds of thousands of voters from the rolls. And in some cases, the removal of voters is important. If you have passed away, if you've moved, those are cleanup things that we need to do with our voter rolls. But in the cases of an inactive voter, we need to do everything that we can to maintain them on our voter rolls. Just because you decide to sit out in an election does not mean you should lose your right to vote. And part of that increased communications is making that list public. The Secretary of State's office is not making this list public. And we've also seen these efforts happen right before major elections, removing voters from voter rolls. And we know in the state of Georgia, where those margins are thin, that's going to make a difference in elections. So those are some of the things that I would work on if elected as Secretary of State. And, I just want to impart the importance, and I think you all know this already, of being active, being visible, having a voice in our community, and showing people that even if we are othered, even if we're being targeted, we are not going to shrink back. We are going to step up and continue to build our lives in a country that is just as much our home as anybody else.
Yeah, so if you guys don't know B, this is why we love B in our state. She is like one of the most amazing women that you'll actually meet, and the stuff that she does and what she accomplishes and what she fights for in our state is so pivotal and so important. And thank you so much for all you do. And I'm a big fan of you. So B, just a few questions, and we'll kind of I won't take up too much of your time. But you are you talked about your childhood, and there's a lot of preconceived notions of living in the Deep South, right? Because we both live in Georgia. How's your experience, like really growing up, shaped your today and kind of your political journey? Just really quickly.
Well, I think that the South is an incredible place. We have a very dark history, but a very rich history. And Georgia is the center of the civil rights movement. And being able to grow up around icons like John Lewis, has been really pivotal for me. It has helped me understand the history of our country, especially when it pertains to the history of Black Americans living here. It has helped me be a better person in terms of understanding movement building. And then in learning our own history as AAPIs, just watching the civil rights movement back in the day where Asian Americans and Black Americans were allied in this joint fight to earn the right to vote. We did not have the right to vote. We did not have the right to own property. We didn't have the right to interracially marriage. And so we were all working in tandem against a system that, has held many Americans down historically and presently. So I love the South. I obviously know that we have a lot of work to do in Georgia, but I think that living in the South provides a very unique perspective, and we are an incredibly diverse state, and we have seen that diversity grow, and we see our leadership change. In Gwinnett County, Tim, where you are, we're seeing more and more diversity amongst county elected officials, local elected officials, school boards, and our AAPI caucus has grown from one AAPI person in 2016 to now 5 of us.
Dang.
So that's huge.
That is. So, one of the things that is going to happen is you would be the first Vietnamese American in a statewide office, not just in Georgia, but nationally. And so, what do you recommend for others that are, that they find their stride and they're trying to step into leadership positions, or just even being an informed American? Like, what does it mean? How this is very important. This is a monumentous occasion if you're elected.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this before, Tim, that I really struggled when I was growing up trying to figure out how to honor my parents' legacy, and what they laid out for me just didn't match who I was. Like, I really, really wanted to be a doctor to make them happy, but there's just no way I would be able to go to medical school. And so, there was always that tension of like, how do I honor their legacy, but in a way that also honors myself? And I think that the acceptance of just, I've got to do what is right for me, like what I care about, what I'm passionate about, and understand that what my parents gave me was the freedom of choice. And that freedom of choice exists because of all the things they gave up for me. They don't understand my career path so much. I think for most of my life, they don't even know what I do, really. When I was doing nonprofit work, they didn't really know what I did. When I was doing state policy work at a think tank, they didn't really understand it. But I try as best as I can to, think about the things that I deeply care about and try to encourage other people to do the same, because so often we're given a mold of what we should be, what we think success looks like. And if we don't see ourselves in those roles, it can be limiting. And so, I think it's really important for all of us to really follow what it is that guides us and lean into our passion and be really true to ourselves, even though it can be very hard.
And, last question, and I could be remiss from you with not to say, with all the stuff that's been happening in the state of Georgia and nationally with all the Asian hate crimes is happening, and, of course, it happened very close to home for us in Georgia. But, we're not, it's not just Georgia, it's national, we're seeing it globally. What do you say to people that are timid or scared to step up and, they want to get involved with sake of engagement, but they're seeing what's going on? Like, what kind of inspirational message can you give to us?
Well, when the horrific tragedy happened in Atlanta, it was, an incredibly painful time for us because it did hit so close to home, and because the more we learned about it, the more brutal it was. And, one of the things that I think is incredibly important is understanding that trying to be invisible has not saved us in any way. Trying to keep our heads down hasn't helped us move forward in any way. Trying to, align with white proximity hasn't saved us in any way. At the end of the day, we are Asian, and we cannot hide that. We cannot run away from that. I think it's important for us to recognize that invisibility will not save us. And we have to be the ones who advocate for ourselves and for our community. And I know that traditionally, a lot of our family structures may not support that or may not encourage that,
But the reality is, as we're that's unfolded over the last year and a half, it's not new. The violence against Asian Americans in this country is not new. And what we don't want to have happen is history to continue to repeat itself. And we are the ones who are most equipped to advocate for our community and break those cycles, as well as advocate for our allied communities.
B, thank you so much for coming on with us today. And, it's always an inspiration. And you don't, in Georgia, we only have, our session is only from, from January to March, January to April, right around there. And this girl is an amazing advocate for our community. She is, I'm proud to call her our state representative, and, kudos on your campaign. Thank you so much for just being exposed and just really being vulnerable out there, and just really just being out there, being our voice for our community, and from all of our family members, all of our 17,000 members and 43 chapters, 40 chapters. We thank you so much for everything that you've done, and we'll fight with you throughout your entire political process. So thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. See you soon. B is amazing, you guys, and I'm so excited. We have someone that looks like us that's running for state office, and it's just an exciting time to be in Georgia. I love it how she said that being invisible doesn't work, and it's just a testament to what we do at policy, right? With that, I'm bringing back our vice chair, Maylene Kay. Come back on stage, or come to stage, actually.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
It's been a great 2.5 hours, right? I mean, I've been taking lots of notes, and I'm certainly learning a lot of new things today. So hang in there, everybody. We're going to be wrapping it up soon. So thank you so much for attending. As you know, we've gone to Washington, D.C. every year, except this last 2 years that we've been doing our virtual summit, and it's been very successful. But we do look forward to going back to Washington, D.C. I mean, I do miss the spring of Washington, D.C., and I miss seeing everybody and, just the dynamics of having a nice group of, of us being there. So what I did was I reached out to the D.C. chapter. Since we can't go to Washington, so we decided to bring Washington to you. And I worked with the DC chapter, and we did a short video about the DC experience that we'd like to play for you.
Hi, my name is Sanam Vivancia, and I'm the president of the DC Metro chapter. I'm delighted to be part of the 2021 Policy Day Summit sponsored by ARIA, the largest Asian American association in the country. This year marks our 10th anniversary of the ARIA Policy Day Summit. Every year, all the chapters come together here in DC to acknowledge the voices of the AAPI community, to initiate positive change and to affect policies that directly or indirectly influence the AAPI community. Push for and make these changes through our 3-point policy plan. This year, since you cannot be here with us in DC, as the president of the DC Metro chapter, instead, we are bringing DC to you. Did you know about the history of the National Cherry Blossom Festival that we have here once a year in DC? It all started in the late 1800s with travel writer Eliza Sidmore that was advocating for over 27 years for the cherry blossom plants to be brought to DC to be planted here. Finally, in 1912, United States accepted this, and Japan donated as a gift to the city of Washington, D.C., over 3,000 cherry blossom trees. Our nation's capital most unique monument is the Washington Monument. Back in 1884, when it was finally finished, it was considered the tallest building in the world. I'm sure you're wondering why you're not seeing any skyscrapers in Washington, D.C. That is because there is a regulation where no other buildings can go higher than the Washington Monument.
So this is Rodrigo again. If you look at a map of Washington, D.C. and where the monuments are located, but a lot of the land there is landfill, literally is a swamp. The monuments are set up in such a way that Thomas Jefferson looks at the Washington Monument and the White House. And you have Lincoln looking at the Washington Monument and the Capitol. And a long time ago, when the trees weren't so tall, everybody could see everybody. But it's a great city, and we look forward to seeing you next year in person.
Yes, so we definitely aiming to be there next year. So now we're going to be wrapping things up, and I just want to, reinforce our ARIA 3-point plan. And this year, as you know, we can set up meetings virtually. So it's time to go to work. Our policy committee is going to be reaching out to all the leaders and representatives to schedule virtual meetings this year. So don't worry, we're going to be reaching out to you, asking you to submit your voting zip codes, stuff like that. And there'll be a lot of logistics that we will work out with you, and there'll be training classes. So definitely be on the lookout, and we'll be reaching out. Tim, you want to come on and say your closing remarks?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mei-Ling, and to the staff and to all the policy committee members. Thank you so much for all the hard work you guys have done. But wow, everyone, what a really, really impactful and really just the 2.5 hours of just amazing stuff that we've just got together. And it's another one for the memories, right? The Policy Summit is one of my favorite conferences. And, we celebrate our 10 years of holding our independently held policy summit for ARIA. Every year, the staff and the policy committee work so hard developing our 3-point plans that's catered to to our AAPI community and in really ensuring homeownership for people who look like us. And so special thank you to the staff and to the policy committee, Han, Mei-Ling. Thank you so much for all you guys have done. I've been the policy chair about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's one of those committees that you just know that you're making such a positive impact on the community. And being even a part of the policy committee, that's how I got involved. And then being asked to chair the policy committee, it really does bring a deeper understanding and impact of what we can do, right? The advocacy piece is truly our next step. You're putting yourself out there, you're being vulnerable, and you're believing, and you know that you can make a change in our community, and it's so important. When I got started in real estate, you never really thought about the advocacy portion. You don't really think about the policy portion or anything else, right? But culturally, a lot of us come from backgrounds where decisions are made from a very hierarchical positions, right? It's made from top down. So many of us are taught to vote in the presidential elections, but we don't vote in a lot in the local elections or the muni elections, when in fact, most of our daily lives, we're impacted on the local level. I didn't know how important it was to vote, even if it was for something simple as a runoff or for sheriff or something else that's non-presidential, until really I got involved with the advocacy side of ARIA. But it was this advocacy piece, fighting for our rights to be a part of the American dream of homeownership, that really allowed me to be comfortable with myself, to accept who I am, and to continue the good fight that we do. And I really appreciate the support of everyone who helped me. Being Asian is okay. Being gay is okay. And it allowed me to have more courage and passion to even run as your ARIA president. And really, thank you to all the mentors and everyone supporting, me throughout the years. But, advocacy is not about me. It's about us. And look at all the amazing accomplishments that we have done over the past 10 years, the No Other campaign, the fact that we can host presidential debates, the fact that elected officials, they listen to us. We can have amazing people to come to our conference, and we inspire people, and they know about us. They understand that the needs of our community, that we have our separate needs that affects our community, and involvement is that testament that the AAPI community is so strong. I ran for office before, but look at our members like Moni, who ran for office last year, right? I know there's so many people that are on the fence that wants to run on something local, on a statewide and federal level, and I promise you will have the support from the ARIA community. I had so much support from when I ran for office, and the outpouring of the love and the financial support, and for that I'm forever grateful, but everyone will be with you, I promise you, within the ARIA family. You won't forget your first ARIA Policy Summit either. And for me at the time, it was being seen by a Representative Hank Johnson from Georgia. And I learned something that day because there was a Jewish group right before us and everyone was talking from the same script, right? They got everyone involved so young. And when I got more and more involved with ARIA, I see how it came together, right? I see the changes that occurred during the administration changes from Presidents Obama to Trump to Biden, the political lines of representative and to being a Republican or Democrat. But what doesn't change for us is the need that for what we do, by working together, we can make a difference. And as we all continue on this real estate journey, others saw, things that nobody really existed. Leaders and mentors within ARIA, leaders and mentor within the realtor world, they showed me the importance of the advocacy piece. So if any of you have any questions, I'm here to help the same way that others helped me, because I can guarantee you for the fact that if you're on this call, you already have it in you, right? You already have the passion and the willingness to get involved. And if you're on the fence, we are all here to lend a promise. We're here to lend a helping hand, and you have the entire ARIA family to be there right by your side, so you're not alone. You are not alone. You're not an other. And by next year, as we gear up to have to follow through with our strategic plan to make policy a focal point next year, and an even bigger focal point, we're going to make it a huge event next year. And so stay tuned for more details as we celebrate our 10-year anniversary of our Independent Policy Summit next year. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, you just rock. Thank you so much.